Today we're going to brew a Russian Imperial Stout. We've already got hot water in our hot liquor tank. In a moment we'll be transferring that to the mash tun to dough in. We've got our grains in the buckets here. I've already added a teaspoon of calcium hydroxide to the grains so the roasted grains don't drop the pH too low. Hopefully we'll hit about 5.4 room temperature. But here in a moment we'll go ahead and we'll transfer that water into the mash tun and dough in it and we'll see what we get. Okay, so we're transferring liquid from the hot liquor tank that has the E-HERMS coil into it into our mash tun. Our start temperature is set at 165. It's running a little bit warm right now just because we're not recirculating in the hot liquor tank. I'm shooting for a mash temperature in the mid to upper 140s. I'll do a 90-minute rest on this. I want it to be as fermentable as possible. I'll probably bump that up into the 150 range toward the end of the mash just to ensure that everything's been converted. But we'll dough in just a moment. We've got some of the liquid transferred out of the hot liquor tank into the mash tun now. We'll add our first additions of grains. You can see the calcium hydroxide on top there. This is a 45-pound grain bill total, which is really going to push the limits. There comes some of that dark malt, which is really going to push the limits of this mash tun. It'll be full. Get this mixed in and get that second bucket started. Alright. This thing fills up, it's kind of hard to reach the bottom, so I like to get that first bit thoroughly moistened. Just a couple batches. We may need to add a little bit more hot liquor to it. Like I said, this really fills the mash tun up, and if I put too much water in the beginning, I'm not going to be able to fit all the grain. So get all the grain in here. The mash is going to be awful thick. Then we'll top it up with however much more water we can get out of the hot liquid tank to fit. Oh, look at that, plenty of room. Go ahead and move a little more liquid in. That's good. I added about it was a proud teaspoon of the pickling lime or calcium hydroxide to that 15-gallon thick Russian Imperial Stout mash. And I'm right where I want to be now. I'm at 5.41. I was shooting for 5.4. That's the same thing. That's at 64, 65 degrees. So our mash pH is right where we want it. I'm going to acidify the sparge water now. One of my kids got this little syringe. It's marked off in teaspoons and milliliters. for some medicine or something a while back. It's great for measuring this out. I'm going to start with 5 milliliters in the almost what will be 15 gallons of sparge water. What I haven't mentioned is we're going to do a party-gyle today. So that sparge water isn't just for the 10 gallons of Russian Imperial Stout that we're making. We're going to party-gyle that and make a second bastard stout that we'll just ferment and drink, not any particular style. I had to add another 4 milliliters of lactic acid to that 15 gallons of strike water. The pH is at 5.65, which is fine. I like it around 5 3/4, but really anywhere between 5.5 and 6 will work fine for this. Well, we finally got up to mash out temperature. It was a big mash and we had to fight it a little bit, but we're right around 170 now, which is where we want to be. The next step is to sparge. These pumps, they move liquid too quickly, so I made these flow restrictors. They fit in to the cam lock fitting, like so. I cut a groove out on the lathe to fit in there. So what we're going to do next is we need to sparge, which is rinsing the grain bed to get all the sugar out of it with this hot water and move it into the boil kettle. We need to move water at about the same rate. So I put one of those flow restrictors in each of the pumps, cam lock fittings there, just to control the amount of water that's going through there. Because like I said, the pumps just move too much water, and I don't want to rinse the grains that fast because it's not as efficient. And there it comes. The white stuff you see in there is a teaspoon of calcium chloride. Our water is only 25 parts per million calcium, and it ideally needs to be above 50, so between the calcium hydroxide and the mash and that little bit in there, it'll bring me up to about 60, 70 ppm of calcium. Well, the sparge is complete. We collected just shy of 14 gallons of wort. It's at about 1088 right now. It's going to get boiled down to 10 gallons, so it's going to increase quite a bit as far as gravity goes. Also collecting our second runnings here for our party-gyle later. That'll be our bastard stout. The running started at about 1040, but I had to stir it up a little bit because the grain bed got so compacted that it was just like the valve was turned off. Couldn't collect anything. There was nothing coming out of it. So we'll see how that works out. Well, we started at 9:30 this morning. It's now 4 o'clock. It's been a long brew day. As usual, a bunch went wrong. Imagine that. Problems on a brew day. That mash just gave us fits. But we're knocking out now. We're down to about 104 degrees. We've got 10 gallons, so it's going to be Russian Imperial Stout there, according to the refractometer. Final gravity should be about 1.115. So here, once it's got some age on it, hopefully the fermentation will go better than the mash did, and we'll have some beer. So I've got this neat system where when I'm impatient or if I'm doing lagers, I keep about 5 gallons of ice in the chest freezer. You bust that up with an air hammer and run it through the pumps. There's an ice water bath to cool the wort. Well, as today's brew day's been, went to get it out of the freezer and it was stuck to the bottom because last time it froze, it split the bottom out. So it's a little bit low, and I've got an inch of ice in the bottom of my chest freezer. So I guess it's time to get a new bucket. But I'll show you how that works in a minute. So as I was saying, I use an air hammer to bust this ice up. I'll put it in the mash tun, add some cold water, and we'll recirculate that through the immersion chiller to get the last few degrees off. Water's really cool enough today where I could probably get it down to owl pitching temps, but we still got the little stout that we're going to do yet. And it keeps getting later, so I want to get her done. Don't understand why this bucket broke. Okay, so we're getting ready to pitch the beer. This is a yeast cake from a cream ale that I made. What I'm going to do is go ahead and introduce some of this RIS wort into it. Shake it up real good, just to get the yeast mixed in. Then I'll split that between 2 carboys. And that'll be my pitch for this batch here. And there we go. So we divided our yeast cake between these 2 carboys using a scale once we got some of the wort in there. Now I'm going to aerate it. I'll do this again in about 12 to 15 hours since it's such a big beer. Through this Stennard stone. Usually stir as I do it. And with a beer this big, I'll probably give this 2 minutes for each carboy. 2 minutes O2 for each carboy. Like I said, then I'll do it again in about 12 or 15 hours from now, just because it's such a big beer. We talked about everything but what the recipe was. So here it is. There is 33.5 pounds of pale ale. That's Breeze pale ale. 2.5 pounds of Munton's roasted barley. 2.5 of Munton's chocolate. 1.5 of Munton's Dark Crystal. That is a malt that I really like. 1 pound of Breeze Crystal 80. Got 1.5 pounds of crisp pale chocolate. And what I think gave my mash so many problems is the 2.5 pounds of flaked oats that I put in there. We boiled it for a lot more than 90 minutes, but at the 90-minute mark, added 3 ounces of Magnum hops. Have our salt additions down there, and the yeast that I'm using, like I said, it's from the yeast cake of a cream ale, and it's WLP001. Was pitched at 60 degrees, and we'll ferment it at 65 for the first few days, and bump it up there to make sure we get good attenuation. Okay, well, we finished the boil on the party-gyle, the smaller stout of the 15 gallons that we made. We used the second runnings from the Russian Imperial to do a second smaller stout. The gravity on that ended up being 1052, which is a perfectly respectable beer. It's not a real small beer by any means. It's an average beer. Got about 5 gallons of a 1052 beer for essentially free. The only additional cost in that is $2 worth of Magnum hops. There's 1 ounce of Magnum hops in that. That was added in addition to the other beer. The yeast, I just took a glug of yeast out of the second fermenter that you didn't see from the second 5 gallons of cream ale that the first yeast cake came from. So that pretty much wraps up this brew day. Still got a lot to clean up, got quite a mess. It's about 6:30. We started about 9:30, 9:40. So it's been a long day, but there's light at the end of the tunnel. It's coming to an end. And here in a month or so, it'll all be worth it. Take care.